Hello, I am Jamey with Stonemaier Games, and today I'm here with two special guests and a third special guest who won't appear on camera, but I have his list on my other screen here, and we are here to talk about games that go out of their way to make them easy to teach, learn, and retain. Andrea and Scott, do you want to introduce yourselves, starting with Andrea, and let us know what your connection is to Stonemaier Games and why you wanted to be a part of this video?
Yeah, thanks, Jamey. So I've been a Stonemaier ambassador for about a year now, but my journey started probably, it's probably been 7 or 8 years ago, playing viticulture and then really taking a deep dive with Scythe. So Scythe's really become one of my favorite games, and also my family's one of their favorite games as well. So we played that a lot. But from there, just kind of exploring more of Stonemeier's games and just finding a lot of joy and alignment with the types of games that you all produce.
And you, Scott?
Yep, I'm Scott. Yep, I actually kind of mirror that. It started with a friend of mine who was like, "Oh, you got to try this game." After we had played Catan a million times, he's like, "Viticulture." It's like, "You got to try this game." And from viticulture, went into Scythe, and then the deep dive inside of having every bit of it. And I soloed through most of it. I soloed through Rise of Fenris. I love it. I love the solo aspects of that game. And I've been a champion for a few years, and I've always did the same thing. Fun alignment with Stonemaier games. Generally, when your games come out, it's almost auto purchase because I know I'm going to like it, and I know almost 100% I can solo it. I'm primarily a solo gamer. It's getting better. I'm getting more people sort of interested, but I'm primarily a solo gamer. So
that's great. And you'll add an interesting facet to this video because most of our games have a separate solo rule book than the core rule book. So it's a whole nother batch of information to learn and retain as you're playing our games. Yeah, so we're gonna talk about some honorable mentions briefly, and then we'll go into not necessarily a top 3 list for all of us. I ranked mine, but they're not necessarily truly ranked. We're just gonna go into some things that make games easier to teach, learn, and retain today. Andrea, why don't we start out with your honorable mentions? Just quick mentions of a few games that came to mind that didn't quite make your list, if any.
Yeah, I'll just say making this list was really hard. I really enjoyed teaching games. And a lot of times I'm the person in my family who but wants to learn the game to teach other people. So, and I find a lot of joy in that, sharing games with other people. So on my honorable mentions list, I think the game my family would have picked as number 1 is Wingspan. We've just taught that game so many times. And so that one is up high for sure. I also have Cascadia, Clank, Mansions of Madness, 2nd edition, which is kind of an app-assisted game, but very immersive. Apiary. And then I wanted to just share a few maybe lesser-known games. So Bohnanza, this one's a classic in my family. It's a kind of a lesser-known Uwe Rosenberg game, and this one's just so much fun, and the artwork's just very charming. And then a newer one we've picked up that has just really amazing components and very intuitive is Llama Land, polyomino game, really cute little llama meeples. And then another one I wanted to highlight that I hadn't heard a whole lot about in mainstream is Grimm Forest. And this is another one that just has a great rule book and a lot of really amazing components, really chunky miniatures and chunky components. And you're essentially building little houses for the 3 little pigs in this fantasy world. So it's a lot of fun to teach and really engaging. Couple of others on my honorable mentions list are Creature Comforts and Flamecraft for a lot of the same reasons.
Sorry, I'm taking notes here as we talk. Creature Comforts and Flamecraft. Flamecraft was the other one. Awesome. Great list of honorable mentions there. Yeah, thank you. Scott, do you have any quick honorable mentions to mention?
I do. I'm also the one that teaches the games because if someone doesn't learn them and present them, my family's like, I don't want to play. So they won't take any of the initiative with it, and it's almost me saying, all right, no. So like with my daughter who's 9, we just discovered, which it's new to me, but it's not a new game, was Lost Cities. Reiner Knizia game. It was when I first opened it, I thought, oh, this is going to be way too simple, and it is absolutely not way too simple. It's a very good and but it is very simple to teach. It's very simple to, but it's deep. The other one, or another honorable mention I had, was Tales from the Dragon Inn, which is relatively new, but they have a nice tutorial at the beginning, so you kind of can get brought up to speed without having everything going on. And the other one with that is, I would say, is the prologue for Earthbound Rangers, which is absolutely brand new. I just got it, and I've just been sort of muddling my way through it the last 2 days. But that one too, for the artwork and the mechanics and the everything, but then to bring you on slowly through a tutorial, I really appreciate that. And to teach somebody where I can bring them on and say, okay, well, you only have to pick 2 cards from each stack. Okay, now we just need to pick, so it makes it nice and easy. And then my other one was Arkham Horror, the card game. I feel like that one, when I first opened it and started looking through it, I was a little bit intimidated of like, wow, there's a lot going on. But the way they present it in the rule book, and having cards with the phase order and the actions and all that, it just made it, I don't know, sort of come to life for me, where I was like, oh, I can picture this. I can see where this is going. I can see what I'm supposed to do. Those were the ones that really, for me, were the honorable mentions, and that helped me to start playing.
Nice, thank you. For the person who's not here, Dave, I'll be reading his picks today. He selected John Company 2nd Edition, Tapestry, and Age of Innovation, the new Terra Mystica game, as his honorable mentions. And for me, most of the games that I picked today, in fact, all of them, are fairly recent games, because there are a lot of games that I think are pretty good at helping me learn them or teach them or retain them. I have one honorable mention, and that is the one that's on the table right now, and that is the Role Player Adventures expansion. I love how Role Player Adventures doesn't require you to really remember anything. When it's a storybook-driven game, and in the storybook, it tells you when you are allowed to rest, or when you're allowed to use an item, or when you can go to a new location. It just says that right in text in the rulebook. Whereas a lot of games, I think, would require you to remember those types of things, and you have to go back to the rulebook and remember and reference, oh, is it okay right now if I rest? Is it okay if I use an item? Role Player Adventures just spells it out. So I really appreciate that about the game. Also, I wanted to mention, just piggybacks off what Scott said a little bit, I have a separate video about my favorite tutorials in games. I didn't include that today in learning games, but I do love when a game makes an over-the-top effort to help onboard you into the experience, especially probably campaign games, where I just want to jump in and start playing, and tutorials make that really easy. So I have a separate video about that. I'll link to it in the description. And then I remembered I had a much older video about teaching, learning, and remembering rules. I didn't go back and watch the video because I don't like to watch myself on video, but I do have a much older video about that if anyone wants to go back and see Jamey from 6 years ago talk about the topic. But today will be much more relevant, I think. So let's jump in and talk about, I'll call it your number 3 pick. It can be a ranked pick. It can be whatever you want it to be. Andrea, what is your number 3 game that you'd like to mention today?
So my number 3 is Star Wars, the deck building game. And I'll say my top 3 are kind of more recent, I guess, my current top 3. But this one is just, it's so easy to teach, has an excellent player aid, and yeah, I'm showing the cards there. They're just amazing. I mean, every time we flip over new cards, we get so excited. You see Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker, Jabba's barge out there. Any Star Wars fan is going to jump right into this and just have a lot of joy. So I guess when I think about, games on this list, I chose them because they're intuitive in terms of the gameplay. They have really great symbology. And then thematically, they just draw you in, right? So this is definitely one of those top games for that reason for me. Taught this game to my sister recently. She just absolutely loved it. So this one's definitely, I think, tops in terms of just thematic gameplay and just really immersive from that standpoint.
One little UI thing I think the game does really well, I'll leave this image actually up on screen, is that it's one of my favorite mechanisms in the game is that it has this thing where you can interact with the cards in the card row. So if we're looking at Luke Skywalker here, if you are playing as the Rebels, Luke will be facing you in the card row with this number 8 directed towards you, saying that you can spend 8 resources to gain loot. But, and this is the clever UI thing, the other player, the Empire, this part of the card is facing them at the bottom of the card. It's upside down for the Rebel player. I think that's just a nice little UI touch that shows which part of that card that you can interact with and how you interact with it. Are you interacting with it with a resource, or are you spending the military power damage to destroy Luke and remove him from the card row? I think that's one of those things that is not one of those easy to retain elements of the game as you're playing.
Yes, I totally agree. It's really clever. I've never seen anything like that on a player v player, type of game before. So that's another one of those things you're like, wow, that's pretty neat. And it's another, I guess, draw in terms of just giving you another option for ways to use your resources in the game.
Scott, have you played this one?
I have, not a lot. I have it. That's one that I'm trying to get my kids to play. Because I'm like, you're gonna love it. You're gonna love it if you try it. But no, I haven't had. I've had it on the table, and we've messed around with it a little bit, but not enough. I really like that. I like how you're seeing, and then being able to interact. We know you need Darth Vader, but maybe I can do something. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
My 13-year-old son and I play all the time, and he loves it. It's great. A lot of fun.
It also does, just to add one other thing that I was thinking about, if you don't know how to play a deck building game, I think it does a pretty good job of onboarding you into that experience. Yeah. But if you do know how to play a deck building game, it doesn't try to change all that much about this kind of the standard formula of drawing 5 cards, playing them all, and then discarding them. And I think sometimes as a designer, I try to go out of my way to innovate and do something different. But I think sometimes it's nice to do something familiar so that you can innovate in other ways within the game, like we mentioned this card row thing. But you don't have to relearn that 5-card draw and discard element. It's almost ingrained in you if you've played games like Dominion and Ascension and things like that. So it's a good reminder to me as a designer that sometimes doing something familiar and intuitive is better than going out of my way to do something different.
Yeah, I totally agree. It was really easy for me to learn that game because of that.
Yeah. Yep. Awesome. So that is Star Wars, the deck building game. One of my favorite games from this year. I love this pick as Andrea's number 3. Scott, what is your number 3 pick?
My number 3 is Cthulhu, Death May Die. I really like the way first of all, the rulebook is very accessible. It's easy to find stuff. It's a big format rulebook with nice big headings. And then an index, which is, you got to have in my opinion, you got to have an index. It's nice to be able to find something quickly when you're sitting there and you go, wait a minute, what do we do? But also the fact that they put the whole play order right on the mat, right on the side of the play mat. So as you're playing and you're looking at your character, you can see it there in the bottom left where it says your turn, take 3 actions. And you can go, oh, there's the 3 actions I can take. I think that it's great. And I've been playing this one basically every Monday with a friend of mine for, I don't even know how many weeks now. We're into the 2nd season. We have 1 left in the 2nd season. And then having a game like that where every single scenario is different. It changes. So you're playing, you have a familiarity with actions and all of that. But then, this time we have to, gamble at a casino to try and or this time we have to, find who, like a murder mystery, find out who murdered this person or whatever. I really like, we've really, that's a game that's just enamored us for the last few months.
Scott, I'm curious so I played this game only once. I only have 1 frame of reference for it. And I remember the core rules of the game being fairly streamlined, which was helpful given that it had these other scenarios that you're pulling in.
Yep.
What does the game do with those scenario? The design of the scenarios, what did they do to prevent you from being overwhelmed with new rules?
They're really usually only adding 2 new actions each time. And it's not adding. It's not like scenario 1 adds 2, scenario 2 adds 2, that's 4. No, they're only adding 2 per scenario. Okay. So it keeps it manageable. And then as far as the rules for when you move like Cthulhu, to move him down the track, that's the timer of the game, is moving him down the track. And those are different for each one, but it's like 1 sentence. We've never we've never looked at it and been like, whoa, what do we do? It's pretty straightforward so they don't keep building and making it more difficult.
Andrea, have you played this one?
I haven't. It's on my want to play list, actually. I'm very intrigued.
Yeah.
Nice.
I wasn't sure how much I'd love it, and we ended up loving it.
That's great. Let's Cthulhu, Death May Die as Scott. I need to be writing these down, or I'm definitely going to forget. Okay, so Cthulhu, Cthulhu, Death May Die, and then Star Wars. All right. Dave, who's not with us, Dave mentioned Catan, and here's what he says about Catan and why he selected this game. So the mechanism, he says, discarding half of your resources if you have 7 or more cards when a 7 is rolled. He says, while I wouldn't necessarily call this mechanism fun, especially when it happens to a player, it's important because it helps teach 2 of the fundamental strategies about Catan. Hoarding resources won't score you any points, and you need to trade to win. This is interesting. So he's going into the heuristics of the game. The game is subtly teaching you something important about the game. He says rolling a 7 works as a teaching mechanism precisely because it can feel so punishing, so it makes players avoid it, and because it happens relatively often. It wouldn't be nearly as effective at teaching people to make trades or to spend resources if it was consistent, like if it happened when a 12 was rolled, or if the consequence was trivial, if you only lost 2 cards. He says it's a strong example of behavioral learning, taking away something the learner wants so they will engage in the desired behavior. That's really interesting. I assume both of you have played Catan. Do you have any other thoughts about that example?
No, but that's a great observation. I never put that together, but I'm like, oh yeah, that's exactly what they were doing. That's great.
Yeah, there's a lot of things about Catan that's very intuitive, and it just makes it an easy, entryway gateway type game. I mean, that's a game that, I think we started playing like 20 plus years ago. And it's still one that, when we get to the table or somebody brings it out at a game night, I still enjoy it. It's just got so much, it's like warm fuzzies. I don't know.
Well, that is Catan as Dave's pick, old school pick. So I picked relatively new games because I think, I would say in general, I think the layout for rule books has gotten better and better over the years. And so I have a few examples to share today of that. And one of them is a very new game that I just played recently called Bark Avenue. It's a game about walking dogs. And the rule book is just brilliantly and beautifully laid out. It uses kind of this format where it teaches you a concept, and then there's a big box showing you an example of that concept in action. I love when games do this. It's really helpful for me to read how the concept works. In fact, I might bump back and forth between the two, but oftentimes I read the concept, and then if I need to better understand it or to see how it works in gameplay, I'll read the example. The rulebook is full of that. Also, the back page of the rulebook contains basically everything in the rulebook, but in truncated form. I really appreciate this as well, so that when I'm playing, generally, I'll read the rule book, and then when I'm actually playing, I will just look at the back page from then on, especially if the rules are fairly intuitive and have few exceptions. So I really appreciate that. And the last element about the game that I thought was nice was more about the user interface. And it's these really nice player mats. They're dual layered. I don't know if they needed to be, but it's a nice touch that they're dual layered. But the mats clearly communicate, for example, how many things you can fit in these slots. So like while you go on walks, the dogs can go to the bathroom, and you can pick up they're pretty cute little poop tokens, but there's only one slot for the poop token for that dog. And so you're not collecting multiple poop tokens from this UI. Same for if you want to take a picture of the dog while it's on a walk, or gather or do their favorite activity. So just a little subtle touch in the UI that says you can do one of these things when you're taking the dog on the walk. You can't do this thing multiple times. I like subtle touches in the UI like that. So yeah, the UI, the player mat, the rulebook having clear examples right next to the rules, and then the back page of the rulebook having kind of an icon gameplay reference here. Have either of you played Bark Avenue, or does that rulebook layout resonate with you in the way that you like to learn and retain games?
Yeah, I haven't played, but games that have that kind of summary on the back page where you can just lay it on the tabletop and folks can just pick it up and reference it throughout. Really super handy.
Yeah. No, I haven't played it either. I haven't seen it. When you showed the artwork, and wow, I love the artwork.
Yeah.
And to see the rule book, that's kind of my favorite type of, as you'll see, that's sort of my favorite type of rule book. That's wonderful.
Nice. And it's as intuitive as it is now that I look at this. There are many Stonemaier Games rulebooks that do not use the back page in that way. We used to use it for kind of helpful links, like go to it, like a URL to go to our website to learn more, or social media links. And I realized a couple of years ago that it's much more helpful to have those icons, have that reference on the back page. So I think we've done it for Apiary now and Expeditions. They may have been the first two that we did that. Libertalia too. We did that one. So. Yeah, so that is Bark Avenue as my number 3. Andrea, what is your number 2 pick?
So my number 2 is Betrayal at Baldur's Gate. So this is the D&D themed skinned version of Betrayal. Very similar mechanically to Betrayal at House on the Hill. Really love this one because of the theme. But the game mechanics in general, I think, are just so intuitive and smooth and elegant. And the game components not only draw you into the game, but also essentially tell you what to do next. So the tiles you're showing there, they have the icons on them that tell you what card to draw, what to do. There's some, thematic card text on these. So essentially in the game, you're moving around the board and you're exploring. You start on kind of a starter tile, and then you're flipping new tiles, either building tiles or street tiles or catacomb tiles, and then you're drawing cards that tell you what happened. Ultimately, it's kind of leading up to the tension of this, like, when is the haunt going to start? Who's the traitor? And then it goes from a cooperative game to a one versus many game. I taught it this last weekend to a game group, and they just had so much fun with it. And it was just so easy. I mean, you really could just teach the game by playing, which I really love. I mean, I think that's kind of the sign of, a game being super intuitive mechanically. In addition, there's these little, the way you track your stats in the game is on these really neat little cards, and these clips that are on here have the stats for the different, starting abilities. You've got, mental damage on one side and physical damage on the other side. And it's just really easy to teach this and just look down and see where you're at. So this is another really nice component to the game.
This game, so I played the legacy version of this game, and it, by design, it creates one of the most challenging, I think, rules situations in any game, because you talked about the haunt. When you have the haunt, there are 2 separate rule books, one for the players who continue to work together, and one you send off the what do you call them? The traitor?
The traitor, yeah.
Yeah, the traitor. You send the traitor off with a separate rule book, and they have to learn some rules on their own from that rule book. But so with that huge challenge, they don't have the help of the group then. They can't learn those rules in advance. But I found, at least in Betrayal Legacy, the rules are so clear in that rule book, and very clear about what you're allowed to share and not share.
Right.
I think that's an incredible feat of design that they're able to pull that off. Would you agree with that for Baldur's Gate, which I haven't played?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, I was the only experienced player when I taught it this last weekend, and the traitor was someone who hadn't played it before, really got into the role, really enjoyed it, didn't have any questions when, he came back to the table, he was ready to go. So I agree with that. It's great to see new players just kind of jump in and splash around.
Yeah. I have not played that one, but that's definitely a testament to the game, though. I mean, if they were able to learn it that quickly, somebody had never played it, that's great. So the rules, it was presented in a way that they grasp it very easily. So,
yeah, I would say it's akin to like the scenario rules in Cthulhu Death May Die, but only one player knows those rules.
Okay. Oh,
or knows
great.
some of them. Yeah,
that's fun.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Great. So Betrayal at Baldur's Gate as Andrea's second pick. Scott, what about you? What's your number 2?
My number 2 is Obsession. You can see it over my shoulder there. So if you order it from Kayenta Games. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it, but if you order it from them, as it ships, they like send an email. And they're like, okay, start here. Watch this video first. Watch which video to me is wonderful. I usually will watch a video, or actually, I'll usually read the rule book, watch a video, and then if I don't get it, then go to even like gameplays. But Obsession, he just lays it out for you. Okay, watch this video first, this video next. Start it solo first because gives you all the instruction. Then inside of it, you have the basic rule book. You have the basic rule book, and then depending on how much you want to deep dive into it, there's the glossary that comes with it, and the glossary even goes into like the different workers and how historically they were used and how it's really interesting. And this is a positive and a negative in a way, but they have player aids, card size player aids for everything. But it actually sort of, when you start getting all the expansions and all the stuff, you end up with this stack of cards. And then I feel like sometimes I can find it quicker in the rule book than I can searching through the stack of cards. But I still, in general, I love that he had thought of like, I'm going to present this every single way, and I'm going to tell you how to access it every single way. So whatever type of learner you are, you can jump right in and figure out this game. And because it's another one where when you open the box, it's like, wow, there's a lot of just pieces, but they all go so neatly in their own way and in their own spaces. And it's a very, I don't know, I feel like it's an elegant game but it has a lot of pieces. So that's kind of anti-elegant, but I feel like it plays very smoothly.
Yeah.
Andrew, played this one?
I have. I completely agree with everything Scott said. This one didn't make my list because I've only taught it once, and I've mostly played it solo. But the components are really incredible for this game. And I had a similar experience getting an email directly from Dan Halligan, the designer. And he laid out when I ordered the expansion to the game, how best to, start playing it, some guidelines and some tips and hints. So almost like it felt like a personalized message when I ordered it directly from the publisher, which was really, really awesome feeling.
Yeah, I have actually an older blog post about that method. Dan has an interesting advantage as a publisher because Obsession is his only game, the only game he makes, and so we kind of revamped our automated message when you buy a game from our website that is along those lines, but it's not as specific because our app doesn't know which game that you bought. It just knows how to fill in your name and make it seem a little personal. But with Obsession, he can go into deep detail and start onboarding you into the game right away. I will say, the first time I played Obsession was at a convention where we learned the game on the fly. We didn't have that helpful email from Dan. We were just kind of opening up the box and playing at Geekway to the West. And it was difficult to learn out of the box that way. We ended up getting there, but it took us around 4 hours, I would say, just to kind of stumble through it. We were having a good time while we did, but I wish I had that email from Dan to help me get there. Yeah, so that's Obsession, Scott's number 2 pick. Great game, very thematic game too. It's one of these games where the theme supports the mechanism so well. That helps it make it easier to learn and retain as well.
Yeah, I definitely, our local game store here had a Obsession play this weekend. And last night I stopped in. I wasn't able to make it, but I stopped in and I said, well, how did it go? I said, did people play it with the theme or did they just play, I'm going to move green and he said, no. He said, it was really good. People were, so yeah.
That's great. So Dave's number 2 pick, following Scott's Obsession, is Spirit Island, another fairly complex game. Let's see what Dave says about Spirit Island, the cooperative game. He says the element he wants to highlight is adversary difficulty. The difficulty in Spirit Island can be customized by playing specific adversaries at 6 different difficulty levels. Having such a granular system of difficulty encourages players to play on the edge of their abilities that they want, so they're learning how to play the game better by constantly ramping up the challenge. And he says there's a learning theory which basically says if a thing is so easy you can do it unaided, you won't learn much. If a thing is too hard, where you can't do it without even much help, you won't learn much. But the sweet spot, he calls it the zone of proximal development, where people learn best, are things the learner can do with guidance from others. It's challenging enough that they can't do it by themselves, but with the help of others, it can be learned. He concludes, by giving the games the flexibility to always play in that sweet spot, each individual player has to regularly seek guidance from outside themselves, in this case, the other players at the table. So the modular difficulty not only helps them learn how to play the game, but also encourages them to play the game the right way by collaborating with their fellow players. That's an interesting, I hadn't thought about that theory. Overall, though, I do like in Spirit Island and games like this where it has a difficulty rating. So if I'm not in the headspace to really go really heavy for that day, I can choose a kind of a basic spirit to play with in Spirit Island. And he's kind of toying with the idea, I guess, of pushing yourself a little bit to maybe not do that 1 star, but maybe do the 2-star, the 2-level difficulty. Have either of you played Spirit Island or played games where you can choose that difficulty rating for your whatever is asymmetric to you?
Yeah, I've played Spirit Island quite a bit. My kids enjoy that one. And we don't play a lot of co-op games, but that's definitely one that's made our shelf and made it out quite a bit. I do like the ability to adjust the difficulty, especially when you're teaching a game like that, because you're more likely to at least feel like you're being successful when you're first learning it.
Yeah, I agree. Spirit Island is definitely one of my favorites. And I actually had a note sort of written too, how they have that Horizons of Spirit Island, which is like the very small version to sort of get you started. But I haven't taught from that, so I can't really say. But I have taught from the similar of the Jaws of the Lion with Gloomhaven. And I think it's great having it. But again, with Spirit Island having the different varied difficulty, I think that in itself makes it, what it is. It's a great game. You don't really need the intro, I don't think, but it's.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I like the mention of Jaws of the Lion too. That had a great tutorial. So that is Spirit Island as Dave's number 2 pick. My number 2 pick, another new game. It's called First in Flight. This is a game about the Wright brothers, but there are a few other famous people who are maybe a little less famous than the Wright brothers for their adventures into flight. And again, it is a really well laid out rule book that was very easy to. In fact, this is a game that was taught to me, but then I kind of had to relearn it to teach other people, and I found the rule book very easy to go through. Again, it has a quick reference guide on the back. I like all that, but the UI I thought of the game I thought really helped. Again, it has player mats. We've mentioned player mats several times, where player mats kind of direct you towards what you can do, what you're not allowed to do. There's a capacity restriction here, so that you can discover as you go on flights in the game. You can discover cards that are hurting the flight, that are impeding your flight. And this is your garage where you can go to fix those elements. And there are only 2 slots for cards, so it's the player mat itself is showing you that you can only hold 2 cards there instead of expecting you to remember that limit. I really like that. And there's all these little you can do on your turn. And one last little touch that I thought was really great and let's see if I can find an example. There are these cards that go. So it's kind of a deck building game that when you're building a deck and then you go on a flight, and that's when you actually shuffle your deck up and reveal cards from your deck, pushing your luck as you go. Here it is. But there are these cards in your deck. At one point, as you go on your flight, you will decide to descend. And there's a card in the deck that shows you that you can descend. So it looks kind of like a card that would go in your deck, but it's a little bit different. And notably, it's a little bit different in that it's a different size. You can see it right here. So it's a little bit bigger. And this is a reminder that the descend card doesn't actually get shuffled into your deck. It is just a card that you can play during a flight. I thought that was a really clever thing, that at the end of a flight, it's very easy to see if maybe I accidentally put it into my deck, because it literally stands out from the rest of the cards in the deck. Just a little subtle touch that I probably would not have thought of as a designer, to make this card, which does not go in the deck, a separate size, a different size than the cards in your deck. So that is First in Flight. By chance, have any of you, either of you, played this one?
I'm super intrigued by it. It's top of my want to play list for sure. Just when I've heard folks talk about it, it's just some really unique game mechanics. And yeah, it sounds like one that you would probably want to play over and over again, potentially.
Yeah,
that's been my experience so far. Yeah, Scott, have you heard of it?
I haven't. No, I haven't. I'm definitely intrigued. I'm gonna talk to my game store today, see what they can do about this. That looks wonderful. That looks very cool.
It does play. I'm looking at the box. It does play 1 to 4 players. It does have a solo mode. And I had a good experience teaching it and a good experience learning it. Yes, that's First in Flight is my number 2 pick. We're down to our top picks here. I have Dave's queued up, but Andrea, we'll lead off with you. What is your number 1 pick?
So I'll say I tried not to pick a Stonemaier game just because we're on your channel, but I was like, I just need to be honest about what my top is right now. So my number 1 is Expeditions.
Oh.
I've gotten the opportunity to teach this one quite a bit recently. And I think it's great for teaching for a number of reasons. One, it feels like a really accessible point into the Scythe universe. So Scythe is a little bit heavier game. And I feel like Expeditions is just right in that medium weight zone. Also feel like just in terms of the game mechanics and the flow of the game, you can almost teach it by just taking game turns in the game. And also just in terms of like the table presence, I just found when people are first learning it, they're very drawn in by the artwork, the way that you explore the various tiles in the game. People get really excited about flipping the tiles over and seeing what's under them and collecting the cards that do various things. And it's also kind of one of those games too, when you play it multiple times, you get different cards, right, that are revealed. And so it can almost have a different feel each time. Mm-hmm. The symbology is very intuitive in this game in terms of just, what's on the player mat, how you, move the power and guile up the track. So all of the components as well, having the workers of various colors that match up with the cards makes the game flow pretty smooth for, teaching a medium weight Euro type game. Just in terms of, teaching a Euro style game that has, a lot of components. I mean, this one's kind of become a go-to that I keep in my game bag on game night. If folks want to learn a new game or, play something that might take a little bit more time. I think it's a good one for that.
I'm honored to hear that and flattered and maybe a little bit surprised because I've heard from a fair number of people that it was harder to learn than they expected. And I've been trying to figure out what that means. One of the things I've tried to pinpoint, and Andrew, you might have some feedback too, is that it's one of our games where we've started doing these not shorter rule books, but smaller footprint rule books, because rather than having a giant rule book that you're probably not going to put on the table next to you, especially if there's not room on your table, that we're trying to do these smaller rule books where you can easily keep it there as a reference. And I think I'm still maybe adapting as a rule book writer to that tighter format. That might be one thing there. I don't know. Did you find it easy to learn out of the rule book, or were there some stumbling points?
So my general approach to learning games is to watch a video first, then read the rule book, then maybe watch a video again. So, Rodney's video was super helpful in terms of learning the game. But in terms of teaching the game, your how to teach video was super helpful as well. So, I taught the game at a con recently, really didn't have any issues with the players picking up on the approach. And I took a very similar approach to what you suggested. I think the rule book is really nicely done. I think after watching the video at least once, I was able to find the answers to questions that I had about specific mechanics. And, I think the thing that maybe comes up most for new players of the game is the wording on the cards and just some confusion sometimes about like what that means. But the rulebook clearly, in my opinion, spells out like the answers to those questions, if you're looking for it. So, overall, I really didn't have any issues with learning.
I'm glad to hear that. And I like that approach to watching the video, reading the rulebook. Scott, have you?
Yeah, I have. And as you brought it up and as you started talking about it, Andrea, I was like, oh yeah, she's absolutely right. Like when we played that, when my group played that, they really didn't do any advanced prep. I had done the same. Watched a video, read the rule book, did that, and I had played it a little bit on my own, but then they jumped right in and really we moved right through. It was really that's a testament to the gameplay and the rule book and stuff. So the table presence that you brought up, that is absolutely essential to that, I think, to that game. Like the way that game looks and the way that game, everybody wanted to look at everything. Like when you flip one, they all wanted to see. I feel like that really adds to it. And when I originally setting it up, I was like, it's just, a bunch of hex. It's a big game. But I see now. I'm like, this is absolutely what it needed to be, because I can't imagine setting this up at conventions and how people would come to it, or to set this up in a cafe or somewhere. You would have people you just want to see, what is that? Wow, that's so cool. So yeah, no, I definitely agree with Andrea.
And as Andrea mentioned, I try to do a how to teach video for all of our games. It uses my teaching style, which is maybe different than other teaching styles. It involves, like Andrea said, explaining a few core concepts and then guiding players through maybe their first or second turns. I found some people really don't like that, and I try to cater to that when I'm teaching them. But that is my style of play. I'd rather do that. I'd rather learn as we go a little bit, or teach as we go, rather than making someone sit through. I just don't. I know there are people who want to sit through a rules explanation that's 30 minutes where they detail every little thing, but I find that's really tough to retain all those little rules unless you're actually using those rules as you go. So that's my style of teaching.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, when it works for a game, it's really ideal for most people, because most people don't want to sit through a long teach, is what I found. Not every game you can do that with. There's some games where you need to take a little bit longer, but it's nice when it works well.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I'm honored and surprised that you chose Expeditions as your top pick, but I'm glad to hear it. Scott, what is your number one pick?
My number one, not surprising, a solo game, primarily solo game. You can play two players, but it's primarily a solo game. Nemo's War. It goes exactly with what you said earlier, Jamey, where you learn about combat and you turn the page. There's the combat all laid out step by step. So if you have questions on it after you've read it, you can read through in this is what you do here. And then it goes right down, numbered, big numbers. It is a big rule book, but it's not a huge game set up on the table. And then the board itself as well, which it kind of intuitively shows you how you're going to move things. I feel like it just shows you everything you need to do. Everything's there. In many cases, I feel like you don't even have to look at the rule book after it's set up. Most of the things are there once you know the mechanics, or the mechanisms. I mean, once you know how combat works, you really can work through it. And it tells you the different phases of movement, or phases of the game. It also, like for the damage to the hull and all that kind of thing, you kind of can see intuitively how things move, where they, back and forth, and everything's labeled with plus this or minus that, or I don't know. I feel like it's very well done, and it's another one where I've heard from other players like, it was so complicated, and I'm like, what? And then as I talk through it with them, they're like, oh yeah, it was this stuff was here, this stuff was there. It's like they take advantage maybe of the thought that the designer put into having everything laid out for you. I don't know, that one
does. Yeah. Looking at the image here, you alluded to this, but it looks like there are several references built into the board itself, and maybe a reference guide or tile over here, where everything you need to know, or maybe most everything that you need to know, is just right there in the interface of the game. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes. And that's how I feel. I could also see an argument of that it looks crowded. It makes the board crowded, maybe, and there's a lot going on, and so maybe it's intimidating when you open it and you see, wow, what's all this stuff? But it's really just helping you. It's like permanent player aids.
That's great. I have not played this one. I've seen it played. Andrea, have you played Nemo's War?
I have not, but I really do like game boards that have that kind of information on them. Just in general, it just kind of made me think of, something I should have mentioned on some of my other picks, but it's really nice when there's a lot of information on the game board, on the cards, on the player pieces. So you don't have to look things up.
Yeah, I think it's nice too with the information on the board for the other players in between turns to then be able to look over it and see what, instead of, oh, here, pass me the rule book, oh, pass me, or whatever. They can, it gives them, and in some cases may give them, a new player, especially, something in between turns to look at, to like, okay, I'm going to keep doing this and get, figuring out the strategy or whatever.
One thing I'll maybe tag onto that, because I love that too in games. We did it with Libertalia, where we had the little round reference in the bottom right of the board. But games that use reference cards, I think there was never a game where I've wished there were fewer reference cards, unless it's, way too much information for some reason.
Yeah.
But I not only like reference cards in games, but I really, really appreciate when there isn't information on the back side of the reference card too. We don't even always do this in some of our games. We should do it more often, because if the reference card is important, I want it right there on the table next to me. I want to be able to glance over and look at it. I don't want to hunt down for that information. And so I just really appreciate when reference cards are almost single-sided, so that I can have them all face up in front of me if I need that information.
Yeah, the new Castles of Burgundy, that special edition, that has the best reference cards I've ever seen. They're so wonderful because they're big. They're not huge to where it takes up too much space, but it has everything, and especially for the monastery cards, where there's the monastery tokens that are they're all laid out, so you can just look and boom, you don't have to. That was our always, because I don't know, we haven't played it enough to have all those memorized or figured out. So
right,
and every player gets one of those, right? That's a key, that you don't just have one that you're passing around the table, because it's something that each player needs to reference. Yeah,
right.
Great. Well, that's Nemo's War as Scott's number 2 pick. Let's see what Dave will so eloquently say about his number 1, Suburbia. It's Dave's number 1. The element he wants to highlight are tile colors. He says Suburbia uses color to distinguish between different categories of city tiles. Yellow for industrial, blue for commercial, green for mentions industrial again. I think that might be a typo, and gray for civic buildings. Using these specific colors for industrial, commercial, and residential tiles does a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to teaching the game, particularly for anyone who has ever played a sim in the PC game, giving instant familiarity. It helps me forward, so I can understand this too. It's less than number 1 because it's a simple graphic design choice that could have been easily done incorrect. Picking any other colors would have probably created confusion for anyone who had played SimCity in the past. It's a good reminder to, wherever you can, ask, what knowledge or assumptions about this subject might my player or learner already have, and design with that in mind? I love that question. Yeah, what knowledge or assumptions about this subject might my player or learner already have? Especially in reference to anything, but also in reference to color. What do we think about red for attacking? Do we think about green for growing something? Those types of heuristics. Are either of you familiar with Suburbia, or can you relate to this? Not just color coding, but think of, something that seems intuitive because of some other frame of reference you have for a game.
Yeah, I've played Suburbia mostly via app, so electronically, but yeah, I mean, it is really intuitive in terms of the tile colors. I think about, some symbols being used, consistently throughout a game, maybe more so than color, just because of color blindness and, accessibility type stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think it's really useful to have things kind of align throughout the game in terms of, seeing the same symbol over and over again, or seeing repetition, in terms of how a game's designed.
Yes. Yeah, that element of repetition. I've even seen some publishers, Red Raven games comes to mind, where they often, Red Raven and Garfield games, they often use the same icons across multiple games, and they're consistent. So if you have learned those icons for one of their games, you can understand the icons in another one of their games as well.
Yeah.
We can go on to my number 1 pick here if we'd like, and that is another recent game. I picked all 2023 games here, and that is the game Forest Shuffle. This is an adorable tableau building game. A lot of set collection, some ongoing abilities, end game scoring in a variety of ways. The rulebook is small and concise. It's very easy to learn the rulebook. Again, there's an icon guide on the back of the rulebook, which I appreciate. But the thing that I think really helps this game, it really, almost all the things I mentioned today are things that the user interface of the game helps you remember things. So basically, you don't have to remember them. It's remember that you have in the middle of the table. That's all the cards that are either revealed or discarded. Because whenever you play cards in this game by discarding other cards as the cost, and those cards go into the forest. They go into this long row. This row is designed. The length of this row is designed to hold 10 cards, which I think is clever because the 10 is the limit. And that is noted on the far right of it, where it says if this forest ever has 10 or more cards, that's when you discard them. So you don't have to remember that number. It's just printed right here on the map. Also, on the other side, there's another element of the game that you would normally need to remember, but this is reminding you of it. And that is whenever you play a tree card, you need to take a card. Not only do the cards that you pay go into the forest, but you have to take a card from the top of the deck and also add it to the forest. So it's taking all these little things that, again, a game would normally ask you to remember, that some games might ask you to remember, and it's putting them right there in the user interface so that you not necessarily can't forget it. You still can, but makes it a lot more difficult to forget. And instead of referencing the rulebook, you can just look at the user interface to remember those types of things. Have either of you played Forest Shuffle or can relate to this idea of reminders in the UI so that you don't have to remember them?
Yes, I got to play that at BGG Con just recently, and it was taught to me.
Oh.
It was so easy to learn and just really charming. I mean, in terms of a set collection game, you know, and building these little communities around the trees. I mean, I was really excited to like collect all the birds and all the butterflies, you know, and it's just very engaging in terms of theme. But I also found that the cards were really easy to understand because of the UI and the symbology that's there. I really didn't have any questions as I was playing it, you know, as to what the intent was on each of those cards, which is actually pretty amazing for a first play to not have a whole lot of questions.
I'll pull up some examples of those cards while you're talking about it. This is the German version, although even with the German, this is actually an interesting challenge to look at a card in another language and see if you can still understand what it's saying. I think you probably could in this game for some of it, maybe not down here.
Super intuitive, like sets of butterflies having, you know, all the different values for 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really, and you said the symbols are on the back of the rule book too. So there's not like an overwhelming number of them, or you can look them up quickly anyway. So that's really nice.
Yeah, one of the big hooks of the game too also has clever user interface, which is you can see all these cards that are tucked under these trees. And let's see if we can find an example of one of those cards. Yeah, these cards are either vertically divided or horizontally divided, which I think pretty clearly communicates that one side, whatever you play, the other side is getting tucked under the tree card. That's one of those things that you can learn like in an instant, but that the user interface of the game helps communicate to you. So you never have to remember which part to tuck. It's built into the card design itself.
No, that's nice. That's really good. I have not played that game. I looked at it because that was another one I looked at when I walked in the store. I was like, oh, look at that artwork. That's great. And then we looked at it, and but I have not played it.
I'm glad, Andrew, you got to play it recently. I have really enjoyed it. It looks like it doesn't have a solo mode out of the box, but I bet it's one that has a solo mode.
Yeah, well, something like that. If seeing what you showed and the way you described the rulebook and stuff, I think that one I could get to the table with the family. I think they would, because if it's something that you. So when you showed that and you were saying intuitive, is before we even said it, like I was like, oh, that must be sets of butterflies, and then you said it. I'm like, oh, okay, so it's very intuitive. So.
Yeah,
that's nice.
Well, that's great. I hope you get the chance to try it. That is Forest Shuffle is my number one. I've loved hearing your thoughts today, both of you, about what makes games easier to teach, learn, and retain. Before we go, do you have any other final thoughts, things that came to your mind that you didn't get to say as we were talking today?
I did, as far as teach, one thing that I think is so important for teaching is maybe love is too strong a word, but you need to, I feel really like the game. If it's a game that you're sort of, I don't know, like just middle of the road with, either have someone else help you or something. I don't know. I had an experience at a con, and I truly believe like this was a game, the whole 4 of our group were so excited, and you know, it was one where you had to plan ahead and get an appointment to play it and all of this. And I feel like he kind of was just like, this is what I don't know. And we'd ask questions. And he's like, well, I don't know. Let me see. And it's like, you just could see he didn't love the game. He didn't really, he was there more to teach, and I don't know what perks come with it, but like that, I feel like in games that, especially with being the primary teacher of it, there's always games that I love, and here we go. We're going to learn this, and here's how we do it, and all of that. But I feel like that's really important. And then one other quick thing, I asked a few friends about this topic, and one of my friends said he feels like he'd like to be able to sit down and start playing, and sort of just go into the game, and then start, if he has questions, go back and look. So he wants a reference sheet, but also for it to be intuitive. And I'm like, from a designer standpoint, that's probably the holy grail always to have a game that people can just sit down and play. But I was interested that's his main way that he interacts. And I was like, I've never thought of that. I'm always like reading and I want to be able to almost recite it so if somebody asks a question, I can, know what I'm talking about. So I was like, that was a totally different view than what I had.
I think that's a great reminder that people learn differently, and people, and so if you're teaching multiple people, especially at a convention, that you almost have to try to pick up on the different ways that everyone's learning. So one person might be asking a ton of questions, another person might be absorbing it, one person might be fiddling with the tokens, ready to actually take a turn. And I agree that your enthusiasm as a teacher can make a big difference. Andrea, as the main teacher of your group, I'm sure you can relate to that how you are expressing yourself as you play is impacting the experience for the other players.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you really have to be excited about teaching the game, I think, to some extent. Yeah. And I guess when I was thinking about things I hadn't touched on yet, one of the things, that I made notes about in preparing for this was just about games that have an elegance about them. Mm-hmm. And I was kind of introduced to this concept through a gaming podcast recently. It kind of made me think about the types of games I like to play and teach. And I think the things that come to mind about games that get to the table more in that regard are games with maybe simple or really intuitive mechanics that have the potential for really deep strategy. And so for me, sitting at the table and playing a game, again, that I've played a lot of times makes it really fun, right? It's engaging for me, it's engaging for the people learning the game. Everybody's having fun. And I think overall, like the energy at the table, you can feel that, I think, just in terms of how it goes. So I think, that's probably the other thing I'd mention as we're closing.
I've definitely found that to be those games that are easy to learn, that are streamlined, that are elegant, like you said, but have a lot of depth in terms of maybe the sheer number of tiles or cards, whatever makes the game deep and deeply replayable. I find myself returning to those games time after time. And I find those games easier to pull off the shelf after not playing them for a long time, because I don't feel like I need to relearn the game then. I probably remembered the core aspects of it, and I'm just excited to discover the cards in a different combination than I had before. So yeah, I always appreciate when games do that.
Totally. If I had a superpower, it'd be to remember all the rules I've learned. The games.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Scott. And thank you, Dave, for sharing your thoughts on these games today. Anyone watching this, we'd love to hear your thoughts on your favorite games to teach, learn, and retain. What makes those games special in those aspects? Let me know in the comments below. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.